believe that's one of the key reasons he drops this notion of colonization. He never again publicly mentions colonization once the Emancipation Proclamation is issued. And one of the reasons for that is that putting blacks in the army. Putting people in the army is a very different concept than telling them they got to leave the country. So the consequences of black soldiers are very important, not just militarily, but just in the whole question of race relations in the United States in that period.
It's a perfect time to jump to, there are a couple ways you can go, but let's go to colonization, which is a question where I think that you and Professor Oakes may slightly.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Nate. How would you reconcile your position on colonization with the evidence that Philip Magnus uncovered in terms of Lincoln's commitment to the West Indies colonization project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't actually know what Professor Oakes thinks about colonization, so I don't know if I agree with him or not.
We'll tell you about that.
But that's all right. You know, I'd have to say that when I was working on this book, one of the things that surprised me, and I'd have to say that to be a good historian, one of the key qualifications is the willingness to be surprised. Or another way of putting it is just to keep an open mind. You go to your research with certain assumptions, certain presuppositions, that's fine, but you have to be willing to change your mind or be surprised by what you find. And I was surprised by the extent of Lincoln's public commitment to colonization. I mean, you know, people knew this. There's no secrets about Lincoln out there. You know, everything Lincoln ever said or wrote is out there online. There's not like no one's finding a trunk full of Lincoln letters in some attic somewhere that no one's ever seen. I wish they would, but I think it's pretty unlikely. But I was surprised going through it at how many times he spoke about it. From 1852 to 1862, he was pushing this colonization idea many, many times. Now, the people who just want to see Lincoln as the great emancipator, born with a pen in his hand, ready to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, colonization doesn't fit. So, for example, and I'm just mentioning this one book because she's made so much money that it doesn't matter what I say, and that's Doris Kearns Goodwin, Team of Rivals, big bestseller. 800-page book, I think, 700 pages. I'm sure it's here in the library somewhere. Look at the index of that book. Look up colonization. There's one sentence in those 800 pages. Oh, yeah, Lincoln says something about colonization. Why? Now, you know, does Doris not know that Lincoln gave speech after speech after speech promoting colonization? Of course she knows. It's not a secret. But she leaves it out because it doesn't fit the image of the great emancipator, which is not really the right way to write history. So eventually I came to the realization that colonization is part of a project or a plan for getting rid of slavery. You know, before the Civil War, there are not a lot of ways to get rid of slavery. How are you going to get rid of slavery? The abolitionists, they had a plan. It's a very nice plan. Moral suasion, they called it. Convince the Southerners that slavery is evil, and they will therefore free their slaves. It's a great idea. Didn't seem to pan out, though. Not a heck of a lot of Southerners decided to free their slaves, despite 30 years of abolition. That's why a lot of abolitionists supported John Brown. Even though they didn't believe in violence, they said, hey, you know, for 30 years we've been trying to convince these guys and we haven't accomplished anything. We've convinced a lot of Northerners that slavery is bad, but what can they do about it? Nothing. Maybe John Brown's got a better way. Let's spark off a slave insurrection. All right, so you can abolish slavery politically by passing laws, but that's how it ended in New York State, right? New York passed laws for the gradual abolition of slavery. But in the South, to do that, you've got to have the approval of slave owners. Slave owners run the South, right? They run the government. They're not going to, how are you going to get them to pass laws to abolish slavery? Well, Lincoln basically follows the plan of his idol Henry Clay from Kentucky. Clay had been trying for 50 years. He had a plan, a very simple plan. Gradual emancipation, that is, it'll take place over a long period of time so as to prevent disruption, Gradual emancipation. Number two, monetary compensation to the owners because they're losing property, so the government will pay them for that property. And three, colonization, because the white South does not want a large new population of free blacks around. It's the only way to sweeten the plan so that it'll be accepted. Now, by the way, it was never accepted anyway. Clay tried in Kentucky for 50 years, literally 50 years. He started in 1799, and his last attempt was in 1849, and he got nowhere. Nonetheless, this was Lincoln's plan, and he pushed it in the 1850s. He pushed it in the first 2 years of the war. Colonization was part of that plan. With the Emancipation Proclamation, you've got a new plan, which does not need the consent of slave owners. See, that's the third way of abolishing slavery, military emancipation. That's what happens, right? It's a military order, emancipation. That doesn't need the consent of slave owners. That's why none of these elements are in the Emancipation Proclamation. It's immediate, not gradual, right? It says nothing about monetary compensation. They're not paying the Southerners for these slaves anymore. And it says nothing about colonization. In fact, it acts as if the slaves are going to remain in the country. In the proclamation, Lincoln says, I urge you to go to work for reasonable wages. That's here in the United States. Now, Magnus and this other guy, as you said, have found documents indicating they think that Lincoln was supportive of a colonization plan in either Belize and British Honduras or the West Indies after the emancipation. I think what they miss is there are two aspects. One is a lot of the evidence comes from Lincoln appointed this minister from Indiana as a sort of colonization agent, whose name I can't remember anymore. What was his name? Mitchell, right. Okay, Mitchell. Mitchell was a scoundrel and not a very reliable his testimony isn't 100% reliable. Let's just put it that way. If you read Magnus carefully, you'll see a lot of it is based on the supposition of what you would find if Mitchell's papers had survived, which they haven't. Somewhere along the line, they all got lost. Because there is no direct link of Lincoln in this story. There are people talking about Lincoln, but there is no document directly connected with Lincoln. But my main point is this. Yes, it's quite possible that Lincoln said, okay, if people want to emigrate, that's fine, let them go, no problem, the government will help them. But it was no longer part of a plan. It was no longer a governmental policy that would follow from the end of slavery. It was now just something, if people felt like going, good, off they go, no problem. Just like if people Irish want to move into the United States, people go all over the place in this period. But it's no longer a governmental plan to deal with slavery. So I think they don't understand that you can't abstract colonization from the political context in which it is being advocated. That's my view. Yeah.
But in the fire trial, you maintain that Lincoln sort of underwent this change of heart in terms of race. I mean, but how would like a continued support of colonization after the Emancipation Proclamation interact with that?
My view is, as you said in the book, that Lincoln comes to see African Americans as a permanent part of American life. Whatever colonization talk there was after emancipation, as I said, is premised on individuals. It's not a governmental policy. It's individuals emigrating of their own volition. If they wish to do that, no problem. Let the government. Lincoln knew there'd be a lot of problems for blacks in the South if some of them want to go. By the way, blacks had emigrated to Haiti in the 1820s. There were some in the 1850s who wanted to go to West Africa. That is not the same thing as a solution to the problem of race in the United States. Before the Civil War, this was seen as, of course it's crazy, but a solution to the race problem in the United States. Now Lincoln realizes whatever solution there's going to be has to be worked out in the United States. The vast majority of blacks are going to remain here. Whether a few people go or not is not the issue. The vast majority will remain in the country, and therefore any policy that's developed has to be based on that fact, not on the fanciful notion of just having the black population leave the country. That's my view.
Let's just backtrack a little bit.
Let's see where, oh, we still have a little time, fine.
Compensated emancipation from Delaware.
Yes. Who's on to that?
Okay,
Ah,
I'll do
Delaware,
it.
great place.
I'm Maya.
Are you from Delaware?
No.
Have you ever been in Delaware?
No, I haven't.
It's easy to miss. It's very, very small. If you drive down Route 95 to Washington, you pass through Delaware for about 10 minutes, and they charge you an arm and a leg in tolls.